The first time I saw her up close, the world quieted around us, like the air itself had decided to hold its breath. She was leaning against the counter in the little cafe where I spent too many afternoons pretending to write, the kind of place where sunlight caught dust in the air and made it golden. And there she was, mid-40s, graceful, the kind of presence that didn't just fill a room but lingered in its corners. Her hair fell in soft waves, streaked with silver that somehow made her look younger and wiser at the same time. She glanced up, catching my stare, and held it a fraction too long. I looked away first, embarrassed, but I couldn't stop the pull, a quiet magnetic tug that left my chest tight. She smiled then, just a twitch of her lips, and it felt like a personal invitation into a space I didn't yet understand. I had never imagined being this aware of someone's small movements. The way her fingers brushed the edge of her mug, how her elbow hovered just short of the counter, poised yet hesitant, the tilt of her head like she was listening for something I couldn't hear. Each gesture said something, not words, but a language I recognized, even if I couldn't name it. I ordered my usual, careful to appear casual, but my eyes kept drifting. She caught me more than once, and each time, there was that flicker in her gaze. Curiosity? Amusement? Maybe something softer, fleeting, that made my stomach knot. And then it happened. Her hand reached out, almost by accident, to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, and it brushed mine. Just a second, barely a second, but my skin remembered it, a gentle electric sting that made my heartbeat thrum. Funny how quiet this place gets when you notice everything, I said, voice cracking slightly. She looked at me, tilting her head, lips parting as if to respond, but she didn't. She let silence stretch just long enough to make me question whether she had heard me at all, or if she had, what she felt. Her presence was overwhelming in a subtle way, warmth in the curve of her shoulder, the faint scent of her perfume, soft and slightly powdery, like sunlit pages in a library. I could feel her proximity in the heat of the afternoon, even as she leaned back slightly, a polite distance that made the space between us feel charged with possibility. I wanted to speak, to break the taut thread between us, but my words caught somewhere between my throat and the tip of my tongue. Instead, I watched her, noting the way her eyes softened when she smiled, the quick exhale she gave when the door rattled behind her. "And if I told you one secret could change everything?" she asked suddenly, her voice lower, closer, a whisper that grazed my consciousness. I felt it in my chest, the weight of her words, as if a door had opened just wide enough to let me peek inside her world. "Then, let's keep it forever," I replied, barely above a murmur. She blinked slowly, a small laugh escaping, half surprise, half acknowledgement. And then, the cafe door swung open with a clang. A man's voice called her name somewhere outside. She froze. Her eyes flicked to me, charged with unspoken questions, and in that moment, everything we had been circling, everything unsaid, teetered on the edge of revelation. I didn't know her story, not really, but I caught glimpses. The way she sometimes stared out the cafe window, shoulders tense, like she was carrying something that had nothing to do with anyone else. I imagined a life full of carefully curated control, the kind you build after losing a few battles with your own heart. Maybe a marriage that ended quietly, a friendship that had turned distant, or simply years of wanting someone to see her the way I did, without judgment. I too had my shadows. Friends assumed I had nothing to worry about. Youth and freedom, endless possibilities, but they didn't see the loneliness, the quiet hunger for someone who understood without explanation. And somehow she did. Even when her attention shifted to some trivial thing, a menu, a stirring spoon, I felt her presence like gravity. It wasn't just that she was older, it was everything that came with that age. Experience, restraint, the silent authority in her posture. And yet, she had cracks, fleeting glances that betrayed hesitation, a finger tracing the rim of her cup a fraction too long, as if she were measuring what it was safe to let me feel. I felt drawn to the edges of her carefully built walls, knowing the risk of falling, for both of us. Our attraction hovered in those small, charged moments. When she leaned across the table to reach for the sugar, her elbow brushed mine, and I felt a pulse shoot straight to my chest. I tried not to notice, but I did. When she laughed at something I said, her breath ghosted against my ear, a soft warmth that left me breathless without words. Each touch, each proximity, was a silent conversation neither of us dared speak aloud. "I didn't mean to startle you earlier," she said, eyes flicking to the floor, voice low. I sensed her self-consciousness, a fragile layer beneath her composed exterior. "It's fine," I muttered, my voice rougher than I intended, because it was never fine. Never fine when she looked at me like she might step closer, then stop herself. There was a risk in every shared glance. Whispers of judgment I didn't want to name, the taboo thrill of crossing a boundary neither of us should. But the pull, quiet, insistent, made it impossible to act as though nothing existed. A pause stretched between us, and I realized our hands were nearly touching again. Her fingers hovered an inch from mine, and for a moment, the world condensed into that space. The warmth radiating from her, the subtle scent of her perfume, the slight tremble in her wrist, it all whispered the same thing. She felt it too. She withdrew, just barely, yet her eyes lingered. I did not move my hand away either. The electricity between us was quiet but undeniable, a fragile bridge built on hesitation and mutual longing. And in that silence, that almost touch, something shifted. We both knew, without a word, that the story between us was just beginning, and neither of us would be able to ignore it for long. The cafe door opened again, jangling like a warning bell. I stiffened, and she did too, her hand brushing mine for the briefest moment before she drew it back. A woman in a crisp coat scanned the room, and then passed us, eyes flicking with that half-recognition that set my chest taut. I could feel her pulse against the table, quick, shallow. I wanted to reach out, to steady it with my hand, but I stayed frozen. Neither of us spoke. Her gaze found mine, lingering, heavy. It was dangerous how easy it was to read each other now, how close we'd come to revealing what we both knew but refused to say. Every tilt of her head, every slow inhale, pulled me further into a space I shouldn't enter. "I didn't expect anyone," she murmured, voice soft, almost swallowed by the ambient hum of the cafe. I nodded, my throat dry. A few minutes passed in short, charged beats. Our hands hovered near each other again. I could see her lips part slightly as if to speak, then close, silent. My own words caught somewhere in my chest, heavy with hesitation and guilt. We leaned forward simultaneously, drawn into the orbit we'd been circling, and for a heartbeat, her forehead nearly touched mine. I caught the faint scent of her hair, the warmth of her breath brushing my cheek. I could feel the pull of something inevitable, a kiss, a confession, a slip across a line neither of us had intended to cross yet. And then, the vibration of her phone on the table jolted us apart. She started, covering it with her hand as though to hide the moment we'd almost shared. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe, my own pulse hammering. The interruption felt cruel, but somehow necessary. We hadn't crossed the line, and yet the tension between us was unbearable. Every glance, every near touch, left the air between us electric, a wire straining under weight. She tilted her chair slightly, just enough to create a margin of safety, but I noticed how her eyes stayed locked on mine. She wasn't pulling away entirely, not yet. Neither was I. There was an unspoken agreement in that silent standoff. We were both terrified, both thrilled, both aware that the next step could change everything. You're difficult to read," I whispered, and the words felt inadequate, even trivial, compared to what was happening between us. "I could say the same," she breathed back, voice low, teasing, but with a tremor I couldn't ignore. We were closer than we'd ever been, yet the fear of what others might think, the weight of unspoken rules and social judgment, held us just shy of surrender. My hand twitched, half reaching for hers, while she leaned imperceptibly closer, drawn by the same magnetic force neither of us could name. The world shrank to a single point between us, a shared space heavy with desire, hesitation, and the quiet acknowledgement that this, whatever this was, had no easy resolution. And in that suspended moment, we were pulled closer than ever, closer than we had any right to be, suspended on the edge of something forbidden yet unavoidable. I couldn't breathe. Every thought I had seemed to collide in my chest, each one screaming her name in a dozen silent ways. She was near, leaning slightly toward me over the small table, fingers brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, a casual gesture, but electric, impossibly intimate. My hand itched to touch her, to anchor the moment, but fear kept me still. "You're here too often," I whispered, almost accusing, though I wasn't sure if it was meant as a complaint or a confession. My voice was low, rough around the edges, closer to her than ever. She caught it, tilting her head, lips parting slightly, eyes wide and yet knowing. Her gaze pierced me. "Am I?" she asked softly, voice trembling at the edges, though she tried to mask it with calm. There was a flicker in her eyes, desire, hesitation, maybe even fear. I wanted to read it like a book, but it refused to open fully. The cafe had emptied slightly, the air warmer now, saturated with lingering sunlight that painted her skin golden. I could smell the faint scent of her perfume again, powdery and subtle, but intoxicating in its proximity. Her shoulder brushed mine, and I could feel the weight of her leaning in, slight but undeniable, as if testing how far I would allow her to cross. I don't know what this is," she said, her voice catching, trembling with a vulnerability she didn't usually allow herself. She didn't look away, but I can't ignore it either. My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her everything, that I'd been thinking of her constantly, that every glance and brush of skin had left me unsettled and alive all at once. But words felt fragile, insufficient. Instead, I leaned just a fraction closer, close enough that her breath brushed against my cheek. The heat radiating from her made me dizzy. "Then maybe," I whispered, voice rough and low. "We stop pretending it's nothing." Her eyes widened, and her lips parted as if she were about to say something, anything, but the words died on her tongue. The silence between us was thick, heavy with everything we weren't saying. My hand twitched, almost reaching for hers, but I froze, unsure if she wanted it, if I wanted it enough to risk everything. And then she did something small that almost broke me. She leaned just a fraction closer, the barest brush of her shoulder against mine, subtle but deliberate. My heart hammered, so loud I thought she could hear it. I could feel her pulse, the quick inhale of her breath, and the world contracted to the narrow space between us. I needed, to close it, to taste the line we were dancing along. She started, voice low, hesitant, trembling. "Can't." And then the cafe door slammed open with a gust of wind, rattling the glass. The moment shattered, but the air between us still vibrated, charged, unresolved. We were on the edge of everything forbidden, everything wanted, everything we couldn't undo. And I knew, just knew, that one step closer and nothing would be the same. I didn't notice the shadow at first, just the way the light shifted as the door cracked open behind us. Then I heard it, a voice, familiar, tentative, almost too loud in the quiet space. Did I hear? She froze mid-step, her hand half raised as though to shield me from something that hadn't fully formed yet. Her eyes widened, caught between panic and defiance. I turned slowly, heart hammering, to see her sister, someone I hadn't expected, standing in the doorway, a faint frown knitting her brow. The weight of her gaze pressed down, making my chest tighten. Every inch of space between us suddenly felt smaller, dangerous. She stepped back slightly, just enough to create a gap, but the tension only sharpened. Her hand brushed against mine accidentally. I felt the tremor in her fingers, and it made the hair on my arms stand on end. My own hand lingered near hers, unwilling to retreat, though every instinct screamed caution. I didn't mean," she started, voice quivering, but the words failed her. The unspoken truth hovered, heavy and raw, in the space between us. I realized then, with sudden clarity, that the careful rhythm we had been keeping, the subtle touches, the stolen glances, the almost confessions, could no longer exist in secrecy. The safety we had built was gone, replaced with exposure, the thrill now tangled with fear. Her sister's eyes darted between us, curiosity mingling with suspicion, and I could feel her panic radiate. Her shoulder brushed mine again as she turned slightly, an instinctive move that spoke volumes, seeking distance, yet unable to break the invisible thread connecting us. I noticed the quick inhale of her breath, the slight bite of her lower lip, the subtle shift of her weight toward me. Every motion screamed desire restrained by necessity. I started, my voice low, deliberate, almost a whisper meant only for her. She glanced up at me, and our eyes locked, charged and trembling. The moment stretched, fragile as glass. I wanted to tell her everything, to erase the sudden threat of discovery with nothing more than honesty and proximity, but words felt insufficient. Her hand twitched toward mine again, hesitating, hovering on the edge of a touch that could either ignite or undo us. I felt my pulse in my fingertips, in my jaw, in the hollow of my throat. The risk had never felt so sharp, so acute, so impossible to ignore. And then she did something reckless. She stepped closer, deliberately, the warmth of her body brushing against mine in a heartbeat-long collision of intention and instinct. My breath caught. The danger of being seen mingled with the thrill of nearness, and I realized we were past the point of restraint. "I don't care anymore," she whispered, voice low, tremulous, but carrying a boldness I hadn't expected. The words hung between us, daring, combustible. The choice was laid bare. Step back and preserve what was safe, or move forward into something impossible to undo. Her body pressed subtly closer, every micro-gesture screaming yes, even as fear curled its fingers around our edges. I didn't answer immediately. I didn't need to. The tension, the nearness, the danger, the desire, it was all there, binding us, pushing us forward. And in that charged, impossible moment, we both knew that the next move would change everything. The cafe had emptied entirely, leaving us alone in a pocket of suspended time. The sunlight had softened, slanting across the table and casting gold on her hair. I could feel the heat radiating from her, subtle but undeniable, filling the space between us like a living thing. Her hand hovered near mine again, so close I could feel the warmth even without touch. I swallowed, heart hammering, aware of every inhale, every slight tremor in her shoulder. She was watching me with those wide, searching eyes, as though trying to read a decision I hadn't yet made. "I can't pretend anymore," she murmured, voice low, trembling slightly, but steady enough that I knew she meant it. The words were a confession, a plea, a dare all at once. I leaned closer, careful, deliberate. Our knees brushed under the table. Her breath came in shallow, even little bursts, and I felt the pull of her proximity, magnetic, dangerous, intoxicating. My own voice dropped to a whisper. "Then we stopped pretending," I said, the words rough, raw, carrying the weight of everything we'd held back until now. Her lips parted slightly, a fragile smile flickering in the corner of her mouth, and for a moment, the air between us crackled. I wanted to close the final inches, to bridge the gap, but I paused, because in that hesitation was the humanity of our choice. To act rashly could ruin what we'd built, and yet to step back would feel like giving up the only thing that had ever made sense. She leaned in, imperceptibly at first, then a little more, until the warmth of her shoulder pressed against mine. Her hand finally brushed mine, a gentle, tentative connection that made my chest seize. It was soft, fleeting, but it carried everything: desire, fear, relief, and longing. "I've wanted this for longer than I should have," I admitted, voice breaking slightly under the weight of honesty. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes, locked on mine, said everything that words could never hold. I reached slowly, deliberately, and let my fingers intertwine with hers. She exhaled softly, leaning against me just enough to make contact intimate, but not overwhelming. Our foreheads brushed lightly, and the electricity in the room, subtle, sensual, unavoidable, was almost unbearable. There was no rush, no grand gesture, just the messy, raw, human acknowledgement of what we wanted, of what we were willing to risk for it. The hesitation had passed. The fear remained, but it was now tempered by choice. "I understand you," she whispered, voice trembling, almost lost in the quiet hum of the empty cafe. "And I understand you," I replied, and somehow, in that moment, we did. Fully. The distance between years, experience, and expectation collapsed, leaving only this: a shared, undeniable connection. For the first time, the world outside didn't matter. The judgment, the risks, the shoulds, none of it touched us here. What mattered was this: the nearness, the warmth, the tentative, messy surrender to something neither of us could ignore. We didn't kiss, not yet, but the space between us felt alive, charged with understanding and promise. And in that quiet, suspended heartbeat, I knew we had crossed a threshold we couldn't unsee, couldn't unsay, couldn't undo. The cafe had grown quiet again, the golden afternoon light fading into a soft, honeyed glow. We stayed at the same table, hands still intertwined, neither of us willing to break the contact that had finally felt like permission to exist in this tiny, imperfect bubble together. Her fingers fit into mine as though they'd been waiting for exactly this moment, and I could feel the subtle tremor of her grip, not nervous anymore, but aware, alive. The age gap, the whispered judgments, the hesitation that had shadowed us for weeks. All of it seemed distant now, irrelevant in the presence of this simple truth. We wanted each other, fully, without apology. She leaned in slowly, resting her forehead against mine, eyes closed. The warmth of her skin, the soft inhale of her breath, made my chest tighten. I mirrored her, closing the distance carefully, deliberately, until it felt like we were two halves of the same heartbeat. "I never thought I'd," she murmured, voice low and tender. "Let myself feel this again." "You don't have to think about it," I whispered back, thumb brushing across her knuckles. "We just feel." A gentle silence wrapped around us, punctuated only by the soft scrape of chairs and distant footsteps in the emptying cafe. Her hair brushed my cheek, and I could feel the subtle weight of her leaning slightly closer, as if gravity itself wanted us to remain this way. No rush, no demands, just presence, messy and human and perfect in its imperfection. Finally, she tilted her head slightly and pressed a soft kiss to my temple, a gesture intimate but safe, a promise without words. My heart stuttered, and I felt a thrill of warmth bloom in my chest. I responded by tightening my hold on her hand, leaning in just a fraction, sharing the closeness we had both craved, both feared. We stayed like that for minutes that felt like hours, simply existing in proximity, sharing small gestures, a brush of fingers, a quiet laugh at nothing in particular, a slow, gentle exhale that spoke more than words ever could. The world outside might have opinions, might question, might misunderstand, but in that tiny golden cafe corner, none of it mattered. "You're incredible," I whispered finally, almost embarrassed by the weight of the confession. She smiled softly, eyes warm, lips curving in quiet triumph and relief. "So are you," she said. "So are you." We lingered together until the sun dipped below the horizon, a soft glow framing our quiet intimacy. No declarations, no drama, just the simple, messy, real truth. We were here, together, choosing to stay. The risks hadn't disappeared, but the rewards, the warmth, the closeness, the understanding, were too powerful to ignore. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't about the years between us, the whispered doubts, or the world outside. It was about this, a connection that had been long denied, long delayed, but now fully realized. We left the cafe slowly, hands still entwined, moving together into a world that could no longer separate us.